The sound of a child screaming can shatter glass, but in the most exclusive restaurant in Milan, it was shattering a mafia boss's armor. Antonio Bellomo had a beretta on the white tablecloth, armed guards stationed at every exit, and a 4-year-old son who was turning blue. Everyone thought someone was about to die. Then, a nobody waitress dropped a tray of champagne and slid across the marble floor. She didn't ask permission. She didn't hesitate. She just grabbed the convulsing boy's face, locked eyes with the most feared man in Sicily, and whispered 3 words that stopped time. "Breathe, my son." What happened next? She wasn't supposed to know that word. She wasn't supposed to know him at all. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I'm responding to everyone. The gilded chandeliers at the Gilded Lily trembled. It wasn't from the wind off the Mediterranean, and it wasn't from the Vespa engines echoing through the cobblestone streets outside. It was from the raw, primal terror erupting from 4-year-old Raffaele Bellomo's throat. The restaurant was frozen, save for the child's guttural screams. It was 9 p.m. on a Saturday, the height of society dining. Usually, the soft murmur of corruption disguised as commerce, the quiet clatter of gold-rimmed plates, and the discreet exchange of blood money filled the space. Tonight, the air was razor-wire tight with fear. At the center table, the untouchable table, sat Antonio Bellomo. Antonio was 36 years old, wore a custom black shirt rolled to his elbows, revealing tattoos that told stories of violence, and had eyes like volcanic glass. He was the head of the Sicilian Bellomo syndicate, a man who had raised empires with calculated silence and a single phone call. But right now, he looked broken. "Raffaele!" Antonio barked, his voice sharp enough to cut bone. "Basta! Stop! No, no, no!" Raffaele shrieked, his small fists pounding the table, his face contorted in agony. He clawed at his own throat, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The silverware rattled. A wine glass toppled. Red liquid spread across white linen like a gunshot wound. Every diner in the room sat paralyzed. The maitre d', a skeletal man named Enzo, approached with the caution of someone defusing a bomb. "Mr. Bellomo, perhaps we could move to a private room. I can have the chef prepare." Antonio's head snapped toward him. The look could have stopped a man's heart. "He doesn't want food, Enzo. He can't breathe. Do I look like a man who knows how to save his own son?" Antonio's tattooed hand clenched into a fist on the table, knuckles white against the dark ink. He had been a widower for 8 months, or so everyone believed. Beside him sat his wife, Valentina, immaculate in Prada, her face a mask of cold irritation rather than maternal panic. The rain hit Milan like divine punishment, cold and relentless, turning the cobblestones into mirrors of neon and shadow. Caterina Santoro stood in the alley behind the Gilded Lily, her uniform soaked through, her hair plastered to her face, clutching a paper bag containing her last paycheck and a half-eaten panino she'd salvaged from the staff room. "You put your hands on a guest's child without permission," the manager had hissed, his face purple with rage. "Do you have any idea who that man is? He could have you disappeared for looking at him wrong, and you grabbed his son like you had a right to touch him." She'd tried to explain. The boy was suffocating. She was a trained nurse before everything fell apart, before she lost her own child, before she became invisible, just another body serving food to people who'd never see her face. But the manager didn't care about explanations. He cared about liability, about reputation, about not angering the man with a gun on table 6. So here she was, unemployed, again, the 3rd job in 8 months. She pressed her back against the wet brick wall and let the rain mix with something hotter on her cheeks. She'd held that boy for 11 minutes while the restaurant descended into controlled chaos. 11 minutes while the monster in the expensive suit stared at her like she'd performed a miracle. 11 minutes of feeling a heartbeat against her chest that felt impossibly, devastatingly familiar. The crescent-shaped birthmark behind his left ear. She'd seen it when his head rolled against her shoulder. The same mark, the exact same mark her stillborn son was supposed to have had. But that was impossible. Grief made you see ghosts everywhere. The therapist had warned her about that. The sound of an engine cut through the rain. Katerina looked up to see a black Mercedes SUV rolling into the narrow alley, water spraying from its tires. It stopped 3 feet in front of her, blocking her only exit. The back door opened before the vehicle fully stopped. Antonio Bellamo stepped out into the rain like he owned the weather itself. He wore the same black shirt from the restaurant, now partially unbuttoned, his tattoos visible in the streetlight. His hair was disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. He didn't carry an umbrella. He just stood there, rain streaming down his face, his volcanic eyes locked on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You," he said. Not a question, an identification. Katerina's back pressed harder against the brick. "I'm sorry for—" "He's asleep." Antonio took a step closer. First time in 3 days. He fell asleep in the car on the way home because he was still thinking about you. About your voice. About whatever the hell you did to him. I just held him. I used a calming technique. It's nothing special. It's special enough. Another step. He was close now. Close enough that she could smell expensive cologne mixed with rain and something darker, something metallic. I've had specialists, child psychologists from Switzerland, sleep therapists from America. My wife has tried everything from meditation to medication. Nothing works. But you touched him once, and he stopped trying to claw his own throat out. Katerina's heart hammered. "Mr. Bellamo, he hasn't slept in 3 days." Antonio's voice dropped to something raw, almost vulnerable. "He screams every night. He wakes up terrified of things he can't name. I sit there with a loaded gun on my nightstand, the most powerful man in Sicily, and I can't protect my own son from his own mind." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. Rain immediately started soaking it. He held it out to her. "You're coming with me. Live-in sleep specialist. 50,000 euros a month. You'll have your own room in the East Wing. You'll spend your days and nights making sure my son survives his childhood. I'm not qualified. You're the only person who's qualified." His hand didn't waver. "This isn't a request, Miss Santoro. I don't make requests. He slept in your arms. That makes you the most valuable person in my world right now." Katerina stared at the envelope, at the man holding it, at the SUV idling behind him with its tinted windows hiding God knows what. Every instinct screamed run. But louder than that, louder than fear or sense or survival, was the memory of that small body pressed against hers, that birthmark shaped like a crescent moon, that heartbeat that felt like an answered prayer she'd been too afraid to speak. She took the envelope. Antonio's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't quite a threat either. "Good. We leave now." The Bellamo estate rose from the Sicilian hills like a monument to power and paranoia. 12-foot walls topped with iron spikes, security cameras that tracked movement like predatory birds, floodlights that could turn midnight into noon. As the SUV passed through the reinforced gates, Katerina felt the weight of entering a world she couldn't simply walk away from. The house itself was brutalist architecture, wrapped in old-world stone, all sharp angles and cold surfaces, more fortress than home. Inside was worse. Marble floors stretched endlessly, reflecting nothing but emptiness. The furniture was modern, expensive, and completely without soul. Everything was grey, black, or white. No photographs on the walls. No flowers on the tables. No evidence that a child lived here at all. Antonio led her through hallways that echoed with their footsteps. He didn't speak, didn't explain, just walked with the certainty of a man who'd never had to justify his decisions. They climbed a curved staircase to the second floor, past armed guards who didn't bother hiding their weapons, past closed doors that promised secrets Katerina wasn't sure she wanted to discover. "The Easter Wing," Antonio said, gesturing down a corridor. "Your room is the third door. His is the fifth. The nursery is adjacent to his bedroom." Before Katerina could respond, a woman appeared at the top of the stairs. Valentina Bellomo looked like she'd been carved from ice and dressed by Milan Fashion Week. White silk blouse, tailored black trousers, diamonds at her throat that could fund a hospital. Her beauty was the kind that made you think of poisonous flowers, stunning and utterly untouchable. Her eyes landed on Katerina with the warmth of a coroner examining a corpse. "This is the help?" Valentina's voice carried the particular cruelty of someone who'd never been denied anything. "Antonio, she looks like a drowned cat. You brought a drowned cat into our home to fix our defective son." Katerina felt her spine stiffen, but Antonio spoke before she could. "She's not help. She's a specialist, and Raphael is not defective. He screams for hours. He doesn't speak properly. He embarrasses us in public." Valentina examined her manicured nails. "That's the definition of defective. Perhaps we should have sent him back when we still could." The words hung in the air like a executioner's blade. Sent him back, like he was a purchase, a transaction gone wrong. Antonio's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Valentina smiled, cold and victorious, then glided past them down the stairs, her heels clicking like a countdown. Katerina found her voice. "Back from where?" "Ignore her." Antonio's tone made it clear the subject was closed. "The nursery is this way." The nursery was a cell, grey walls, a single window with bars that were supposedly decorative but felt like a prison, a pristine white crib that looked unused, toys still in their packaging, lined up on shelves like products in a showroom, a rocking chair that had never been rocked. The only sound was the hum of a medical-grade air purifier in the corner. No wonder the boy couldn't sleep. This room felt like a tomb for the living. Katerina set down her bag and turned to find Antonio watching her from the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I need supplies," she said. "Paint, warm colors, yellow, maybe orange, soft lighting, music, and those toys need to come out of their boxes. My wife designed this room. She hired a child psychologist from Zurich. Your wife designed a showroom." Katerina met his eyes, surprised by her own boldness. "Not a home. I need to make this space feel safe. Children don't sleep in museums." Something flickered across Antonio's face. Surprise, maybe, or respect. He pulled out his phone, typed something, then pocketed it. "You'll have whatever you need by morning." He left without another word, but Katerina felt his presence linger. She turned to the grey walls and began to hum, an old lullaby her own mother had sung, back when the world still made sense. She walked the perimeter of the room, touching the cold surfaces, imagining warmth seeping into them like sunlight through winter clouds. She didn't notice Antonio had returned to the doorway, drawn back by the sound. He stood in the shadows, watching this strange woman transform his son's prison into something that almost felt like hope, and wondered what the hell he'd brought into his house. The third night, Raphael let Katerina bathe him. It was a small victory that felt monumental. For 2 days he'd screamed whenever anyone tried to touch him with water, as if the bathtub itself was a torture device. But Katerina had filled it with toys that floated, had made the water lukewarm instead of hot, had sung the same lullaby over and over until his small fists unclenched. Now he sat in the shallow water, quiet, letting her pour cupfuls over his dark curls. His eyes, those devastating brown eyes that held too much fear for a 4-year-old, tracked her movements with cautious trust. "There we go, tesoro," she murmured, working gentle shampoo through his hair. "You're doing so well. So brave." She tilted his head back to rinse, and that's when she saw it. Behind his left ear, barely visible beneath the wet hair. A birthmark, crescent-shaped, reddish-brown, about the size of a fingerprint. Before we continue, my ex-wife said I wouldn't reach 3K subscribers. I need you to prove her wrong. Katerina's hands froze. The cup slipped from her fingers, splashing into the water. Raphael flinched, but she barely noticed. Her vision tunneled. Her breath came in short, desperate pulls. No, this wasn't possible. She'd been told her son was stillborn. She'd been drugged, delirious from blood loss, barely conscious when they'd whispered the news. She'd never seen the body. They'd said it was better that way, that she shouldn't carry that image. The doctor had been so kind, so gentle, had arranged everything, including the cremation while she recovered. Dr. Luca Vargo, private clinic, cash only. No questions asked for pregnant women with nowhere else to go. Her hands trembled as she lifted Raphael from the tub, wrapped him in a towel, held him against her chest, perhaps too tightly. He didn't protest, just pressed his wet head against her shoulder and made a small sound that might have been contentment. The birthmark burned in her mind like a brand. She'd imagined it so many times on the child she'd lost, had dreamed about tracing it with her finger, had woken up sobbing because she'd never gotten the chance. But grief made you see patterns where there were none, made you invent connections, made you crazy. She needed proof, real proof, not just the desperate delusion of a broken woman who couldn't let go. She waited until 2 a.m., when even the guards grew lazy, when Antonio was locked in his study with whatever bloody business consumed his nights, when Valentina was presumably asleep in her separate wing of the house. She'd learned the rhythms of this cold fortress, learned which floorboards creaked, learned which cameras had blind spots. The West Wing was forbidden territory, Antonio's private office. She'd been explicitly told never to enter. The lock was electronic, but not sophisticated. She'd watched enough true crime documentaries during her endless insomniac nights to know how to bypass it with a credit card and patience. The door opened with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Inside, everything was organized with military precision. Files, ledgers, computers she wouldn't dare touch. She moved to the filing cabinet marked personal and found it unlocked. Arrogance or trust, she couldn't tell which. Raphael's file was thin, too thin for a 4-year-old's life. She pulled it out with shaking hands and spread the contents across Antonio's desk. Birth certificate, medical records, vaccination schedule, all dated, all official looking. But the birth certificate was wrong. The paper quality was too new, the ink too fresh. And there, at the bottom, the signature that made her blood turn to ice. Dr. Luca Vargo, the same doctor who'd delivered her stillborn son, the same doctor whose clinic had mysteriously closed 6 months after her tragedy, the same doctor whose name she'd tried to forget but never could. She photographed everything with trembling hands, the phone camera clicking like a heartbeat. Birth date, August 3rd, 4 years ago. Mother, Valentina Bellamo. Father, Antonio Bellamo. But the date was wrong. She'd given birth August 1st, 2 days earlier. 2 days that could be explained by paperwork delays, or by the time it took to steal a child and forge a new identity. Katerina's legs gave out. She sat in Antonio's chair, surrounded by evidence of a crime so monstrous she could barely comprehend it. They'd taken her baby, told her he was dead, and sold him to the Bellamo family like he was property. "Looking for something?" The voice came from the doorway. Katerina's head snapped up to find Antonio standing there, still dressed, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp as broken glass. She was caught. And in this house, with this man, being caught could mean disappearing forever. Antonio had said nothing about finding her in his office, just stared at the spread documents, at her terrified face, then told her to clean it up and go to bed. The silence was worse than rage. It meant he was thinking, calculating, deciding what to do with a woman who'd seen too much. 3 days later, he summoned her to the formal dining room with instructions that felt like a death sentence. "There's a dinner tonight. Important guests. Raphael will attend. You'll be there as his nanny. Wear something appropriate." The dress Valentina had sent to her room was black, modest, expensive. The uniform of hired help who needed to look presentable, but invisible. Katerina's hands shook as she zipped it up. This felt like a trap, like being paraded before execution. The dining room had been transformed. Crystal glittered under chandelier light. The table was set for 12 with china that probably cost more than Katerina's former annual salary. Guards stood at every entrance, their bulges under tailored jackets unmistakable. Valentina held court at one end of the table in crimson silk, her smile sharp as a scalpel. Antonio sat at the head, his expression carved from stone. Between them, an empty chair waited for the guest of honor. Katerina kept Raphael close, seated beside her at the far end where the help belonged. He was unusually quiet, picking at his specially prepared meal, occasionally glancing at her for reassurance. She'd braided his hair back, and her eyes kept drifting to the spot behind his ear where the birthmark hid beneath dark curls. "He's late," Valentina announced, her voice dripping with theatrical annoyance. How very rude of our esteemed doctor. Doctor. Katerina's blood turned to slush. The doors opened. A man entered with the confidence of someone who'd bought his way out of consequences his entire life. Mid-50s, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a suit that screamed new money, trying to look like old money. His smile was practiced, professional, completely empty of warmth. Dr. Luca Vargo. Katerina's vision blurred at the edges. She gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles went white. It was him. The man who'd held her hand while she screamed through labor, who'd told her with such gentle sympathy that her baby hadn't made it, who'd arranged everything so efficiently, so kindly while he was stealing her child. Antonio. Vargo crossed the room with arms spread like they were old friends. And the lovely Valentina. Thank you for having me. I know this is delicate business. Sit. Antonio's voice could have frozen the Mediterranean. Say what you came to say. Vargo's smile faltered for a microsecond before recovering. He sat, accepted wine from a trembling server, then leaned back with practiced ease. I'll be direct. I have records, very detailed records of certain transactions, adoptions that bypassed inconvenient legal channels. Babies born to women who couldn't keep them, placed with families who could provide better lives. His eyes flicked to Raffaele. Beautiful children who deserved better than poverty and desperation. Valentina's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. Antonio's expression didn't change, but Caterina saw his hand move beneath the table, toward where she knew he kept a weapon. "How much?" Antonio asked flatly. €2,000,000. For my silence, for the destruction of all records, for your peace of mind that your family's legitimacy won't be questioned. Blackmail. He was blackmailing them over stolen children, over Raphael, over the fact that the Bellomo heir wasn't actually theirs. Caterina felt something crack inside her chest. This monster had built an empire selling babies to desperate wealthy couples. Had probably told dozens of women their children were dead while he pocketed hundreds of thousands. Was now squeezing more money from the families he'd already victimized. Raphael whimpered beside her. His small hand found hers under the table, squeezing tight. He could feel the tension, the danger. His breathing was starting to accelerate. Caterina made a decision. "No," she said loudly. Every head turned toward her. "No, no, Raffaele, not now, tesoro. Stay with me." She scooped him up as he began to wail, a performance of an impending meltdown that wasn't entirely fake. His real anxiety mixed with her theatrical urgency. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." She directed this at Antonio while backing toward the door. "He needs his room. He needs quiet. I have to. Go." Antonio's eyes locked with hers. In them she saw understanding. Permission. Maybe even gratitude. She fled the room with Raphael in her arms, his cries echoing through the halls. But before the doors closed behind her, she heard Vargo's voice, confused and irritated. "The nanny looks familiar. Do I know her from—" The door shut. Caterina ran. Caterina had just gotten Raphael calmed down, his breathing finally evening out as she rocked him in the newly painted nursery when she heard the shouting. It came from below, muffled by floors and walls, but unmistakable in its fury. Antonio's voice, volcanic and deadly, then Valentina's, shrill and defensive, and a third voice, Vargo's, rising in pitch from smooth manipulation to desperate self-preservation. "I'm telling you, that woman is Caterina Santoro, the mother from the San Remo clinic. She was supposed to think the baby died. I gave her the sedatives myself, showed her fake paperwork." Raphael stirred in her arms. Caterina held him tighter, her heart a drum against her ribs. They knew. Vargo had recognized her. The entire house of cards was collapsing. "You sold us a stolen child?" Antonio's words came through the floorboards like an earthquake's warning tremor. "You told us the mother had signed away her rights. You showed us documents. The documents were real enough. She was nobody, a nurse who got pregnant by some dead boyfriend, alone with no family. Who would miss her baby? Who would believe her? I gave that child a better life." Caterina's hands shook so violently she had to set Raphael down in his crib. He immediately started to whimper, sensing her distress. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to breathe, trying to think through the white noise of rage and horror flooding her system. Dead boyfriend. They'd researched her. Knew Marco had died in a motorcycle accident 3 months before she gave birth. Knew she'd been vulnerable, alone, desperate, perfect victim. More shouting. A crash, furniture overturning. Then Valentina's voice, clearer now, probably near the staircase. "This is your fault, Antonio. You wanted a son so badly, you didn't ask the right questions. And now she's here, in our house, with access to everything. She could destroy us. The family would never accept an heir who's not blood. He is blood." Antonio's words were quieter now, but somehow more terrifying. "He's my son. I've raised him. That makes him mine." The authorities won't see it that way. Neither will your rivals. They'll use this to dismantle everything you've built. Silence. The kind of silence that precedes violence. Then Valentina again, calculating, cold. There's only one solution. Vargo has people, professionals. We eliminate the problem, the woman, the doctor, anyone who knows. We burn the records. It never happened. Katerina's blood turned to ice. She was the problem. She and Vargo both. Loose ends that needed cutting. She heard footsteps on the stairs, multiple sets, heavy boots, not household staff. Security moving with purpose. She ran to the nursery door and locked it, knowing it would buy seconds at most. Raphael was crying now, full volume, terrified by her terror. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands. No signal. The estate's walls were too thick. She couldn't call police, couldn't call anyone. She was trapped in a fortress that had just become her execution chamber. A window. She ran to it, looked down at the 30-foot drop to the courtyard below. Impossible with a child. Even alone, she'd likely break both legs. The bars were decorative but solid. The sound of electronic locks disengaging echoed through the house. Beep, beep, beep. The main gates, the perimeter doors, the panic room seals. Someone was systematically unlocking the estate's defenses. Valentina. It had to be Valentina. She had the master codes. Through the window, Katerina saw headlights approaching up the long driveway. Not one vehicle, 3. Black vans moving fast, their windows tinted, their purpose unmistakable. Vargo's cleanup crew. Valentina had just invited death into the house to tie up loose ends. And she'd unlocked every door to make sure it could reach every corner. Katerina pulled Raphael from the crib, held him against her chest as his screams hit a pitch that felt like prophecy. She backed into the corner of the nursery, scanning desperately for anything that could be used as a weapon. A lamp, a wooden toy, her bare hands if necessary. Outside, car doors slammed, footsteps crunched on gravel. Someone barked orders in clipped, professional tones. The security system chimed. Front entrance breached. They were inside. The lights died all at once, plunging the Bellomo estate into absolute darkness. Katerina's breath stopped. Raphael's screaming cut off mid-cry, replaced by terrified hiccuping sobs. Emergency lighting should have kicked in. The house had backup generators, redundant systems, millions of euros worth of security infrastructure. But there was only darkness and the sound of boots moving through corridors with tactical precision. Someone had killed the power deliberately. Someone who knew exactly which breakers to hit. Gunfire erupted below. Not the controlled shots of Antonio's guards, but the rapid staccato of automatic weapons. Screaming. More gunshots. The wet sound of bodies hitting marble. They were executing the household staff. Katerina's nursing training kicked in before conscious thought could paralyze her. Triage, assessment, action. She had maybe 3 minutes before they reached the second floor. She set Raphael down in the darkest corner of the nursery, pressed her finger to his lips. "Silent game," she whispered, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. "Like we practiced. Silent as a mouse. Can you do that for Mama?" The word slipped out unconsciously. Raphael's eyes went wide in the darkness, but he nodded, pressing both his small hands over his mouth. Katerina moved fast. The nursery had an adjoining bathroom. She'd insisted on it for Raphael's nighttime needs. She grabbed everything useful: bleach, ammonia, glass cleaner, rubbing alcohol. Her hands worked on autopsy, mixing chemicals in ways she'd learned about in nursing school toxicology courses. What not to combine because of dangerous reactions. Now she combined them deliberately. Bleach and ammonia created chloramine gas, not lethal in small doses, but enough to burn eyes and throats, to disorient and disable. She soaked towels in the mixture, stuffed them at the base of the door's exterior side. Anyone trying to breach would get a face full of caustic vapor. The heavy oak changing table became a barricade. She shoved it against the door with strength born from pure maternal fury, her muscles screaming. Added the rocking chair, the toy chest, everything that had mass. Glass cleaner in spray bottles, aim for eyes. Rubbing alcohol, flammable, could be lit if she needed fire. She grabbed Raphael's metal toy cars, scattered them on the floor behind the barricade. Makeshift caltrops, a pair of scissors from the craft supplies, a wire hanger straightened into a stabbing implement, a heavy crystal frame, blunt force trauma. She was building an arsenal from a nursery. More gunfire below, closer now. The staircase. She heard Antonio's voice roaring orders, heard his guards returning fire, but they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. How many mercenaries had Vargo brought? How much had Valentina paid to ensure her secret died tonight? Footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets, moving with the efficiency of military contractors who'd done this before. Second floor clear, moving to third. 2 targets remaining, the woman and the child. Orders are elimination. Make it look like a home invasion gone wrong. Katerina crouched behind her barricade, weapons arranged within reach. Raphael hidden in the bathroom with instructions to crawl into the cabinet under the sink if anyone got through. Her hands had stopped shaking. Everything had narrowed to pure, crystalline focus. They wanted to take her son again? They'd have to go through her corpse. The doorknob rattled, tested. A voice. Locked. Breaching. The first kick sent the door shuddering against the barricade. The second moved it an inch. On the third, the chemical-soaked towels did their work. Coughing, violent swearing, the sound of men stumbling back. The fuck? Chemical agent! She used the confusion, yanked the door open 6 inches, and threw the contents of the first spray bottle through the gap. Ammonia and bleach mixture directly into exposed faces. Screaming. Real screaming, not tactical communication. A hand reached through, trying to grab the door. Katerina brought the scissors down hard, stabbing through the fleshy part between thumb and forefinger. The hand withdrew with a howl. Bitch is armed. Repeat, target is armed and... Gunfire shredded the door. Katerina threw herself flat as bullets punched through wood, showering splinters. She crawled toward Raphael's hiding spot, covering him with her body as the world exploded into noise and chaos. Then different gunfire, heavier caliber, from the hallway but aimed away from her door. Antonio's voice, raw and murderous. You want my son? Go through me. Antonio crashed through what remained of the nursery door like a vengeful god, blood streaming from his left shoulder, a Glock in each hand. Behind him lay 3 bodies in the hallway, their tactical gear no match for a man defending his home with the fury of the damned. He took in the scene instantly, the chemical haze burning his eyes, the improvised barricade, the shredded door, and Katerina crouched in the center of the room with a pair of surgical scissors pressed against a mercenary's carotid artery. The man was on his knees, frozen, his own weapon kicked across the floor. His face white with the understanding that one wrong move would open his throat. Don't, Katerina said quietly, her voice steady as steel. Don't move. Don't breathe hard. Don't test me. Antonio's respect for this woman, already considerable, multiplied exponentially. She wasn't trembling, wasn't hysterical. She'd turned a nursery into a battlefield and won. Raffaele? Antonio's voice was ragged. Bathroom, safe. He moved past her, keeping his weapons trained on the mercenary, and found his son huddled in the cabinet under the sink, exactly as instructed, both hands still pressed over his mouth, his eyes huge and terrified, but dry. The boy had been silent through a firefight. Trauma or obedience, Antonio couldn't tell which was worse. "Come here, Figlio." Antonio holstered one weapon and pulled Raphael out with his good arm. Ignoring the fresh blood now soaking through his shirt, the boy wrapped himself around his father like a python, silent and shaking. More footsteps thundering up the stairs. Too many. Antonio's remaining guards were dead or pinned down. The mercenaries were regrouping for a final push. "Panic room!" Antonio snapped at Caterina. "Now! What about him?" She gestured with the scissors at her captive. Antonio shot the mercenary through the head without hesitation. The man crumpled. Caterina flinched but didn't scream, didn't look away. She just grabbed the dead man's tactical vest and pulled out 2 spare magazines before following Antonio. The panic room was hidden behind a false wall in Antonio's bedroom, accessible through biometric lock. He pressed his bloodied hand to the scanner, and the wall slid open, revealing a reinforced steel chamber the size of a small apartment. Medical supplies, weapons, communications equipment, enough food and water for a week-long siege. The door sealed behind them with a hydraulic hiss, 6 inches of steel between them and death. Raphael finally started crying, great gasping sobs against Antonio's chest. "Let me see the shoulder," Caterina said, already moving to the medical cabinet. She worked fast, cutting away his shirt, assessing the wound with professional efficiency. "Through and through. Clean. You're lucky." "I don't feel lucky." Antonio winced as she irrigated the wound. "My wife just tried to have us killed. My son's doctor is a child trafficker, and my security system was compromised from the inside. Define lucky." Caterina said nothing, just worked, her hands steady as she packed the wound and wrapped it. Raphael had quieted to hiccups, his face buried in his father's neck. "He has a birthmark," Caterina said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Behind his left ear, shaped like a crescent moon." Antonio's eyes found hers. "I know, I've seen it." "My son had the same mark." Her hands stilled on the bandage. "The son they told me was stillborn. The son Dr. Vargo delivered in a private clinic 4 years and 2 days before Raffaele's forged birth certificate says he was born." The air in the panic room seemed to compress. Antonio stared at her, his brilliant tactical mind processing the implications, arranging the pieces, seeing the picture she was painting. "You're saying, 'He's not yours, Antonio.'" The words came out broken, jagged with 4 years of grief. "He's mine. Vargo stole him from me while I was unconscious, told me he died, and sold him to you and Valentina like he was merchandise. You bought my stolen son." Raphael stirred between them, his small hand reaching out to touch Caterina's face. "Mama," he whispered. The word he'd called her during the silent game, the word that had slipped out without permission. Antonio looked at his son, her son, their son, at the woman who'd turned a nursery into a fortress to protect him, at the blood on all their hands, and the truth that was somehow worse than any lie. "Then we have a problem," he said quietly, "because I'm not giving him up." Antonio stared at Raphael for a long moment, really looked at him for the first time with new eyes. The shape of the boy's face, the curve of his mouth, the deep brown eyes that had always seemed too soulful, too aware. They weren't Valentina's eyes. They weren't his eyes. They were Caterina's. 4 years, Antonio said, his voice hollow. "I've loved him for 4 years, stayed awake watching him breathe, learned every sound he makes. That doesn't just disappear because of biology. I'm not asking you to stop loving him." Caterina's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm telling you the truth. What you do with it, what I do with it, is survive the next hour. Antonio's tactical mind reasserted itself, pushing emotion into a box he'd open later or never. Then we deal with Vargo. Then we decide custody. Agreed? The word custody, applied to the child they were both holding, felt absurd given the circumstances, but Katerina nodded. Antonio moved to the panic room's security terminal, his wounded shoulder forgotten. 12 screens flickered to life, showing camera feeds from throughout the estate. 8 mercenaries still operational, moving in coordinated teams. His guards, the ones still alive, had retreated to defensive positions but were pinned down. "Valentina?" Katerina asked. Antonio cycled through cameras until he found her. Safe in her private wing, doors locked, watching everything unfold on her own tablet, waiting to see who survived so she could adjust her story accordingly. "I'll deal with her after." His tone made it clear how permanent that dealing would be. He pulled up the estate's master control system. The mercenaries had cut main power, but the panic room had independent access to all systems. With a few keystrokes, Antonio could become god of this fortress. "Can you watch the screens? Call out positions?" He was already loading weapons, checking magazines, transforming into something Katerina had only glimpsed before. The capo who'd built an empire on violence. "I'm a nurse, not a tactician. You turned a nursery into a kill zone with cleaning supplies. You can read a security camera." He handed her a headset. "I need eyes." "You're my eyes." She took the headset with trembling hands. Raphael she settled in the corner with noise-cancelling headphones and a tablet playing silent cartoons, the absurdity of keeping a child entertained during a home invasion not lost on either adult. Antonio stood at the panic room door. "When I open this, there's no coming back. You understand? I'm ending this tonight." "Good." He smiled grimly, then opened the door and vanished into the darkness like smoke. Katerina watched him materialize on the cameras, a ghost moving through his own house. 2 hostiles, east corridor, moving toward your position. Wait, they're splitting up. 1 doubling back. Antonio's voice crackled in her ear. "Distance? 20 feet. 15. He's at the corner." The camera caught the muzzle flash, the body dropping. Antonio didn't slow down. Stairwell is clear. 3 grouped in the main hall, behind cover. "Lights!" Katerina found the lighting controls, killed every bulb on the first floor. The mercenaries' night vision goggles flared bright on the cameras, blinding them. Antonio struck while they were tearing off their equipment, a vengeful shadow with perfect knowledge of his terrain. They worked like that for 20 brutal minutes. Katerina guiding, Antonio executing. The house became a hunting ground where the prey had foolishly entered the predator's den. "Wine cellar," Katerina said suddenly. "Camera 3. That's Vargo." The doctor was trying to escape through the service entrance, dragging a bag that probably contained every incriminating document he owned. Insurance or escape fund, it didn't matter now. "I see him." Antonio was already moving. Katerina made a decision. "I'm coming down. Stay with Raffaele. He's locked in a room that could survive a nuclear strike. I'm coming down." She was already moving, leaving the headset, grabbing one of the spare weapons. "This is my fight too." She found them in the wine cellar, Antonio blocking the exit, Vargo pressed against the wall between racks of bottles worth more than most houses. The doctor's silver hair was disheveled, his expensive suit torn. He looked like what he was, a predator finally cornered. "Katerina." Vargo's voice tried for sympathy. "Please, I gave your son a good life, better than you could have provided. You were alone, broke, grieving. You stole my child and told me he was dead." Her voice was ice. You let me grieve a living son for 4 years. Antonio. Vargo turned desperate. You love that boy. You're his father in every way that matters. She's just genetics. Just a woman who... Antonio handed Katerina his gun. Your son, he said quietly. Your call. Katerina had aimed the gun at Dr. Vargo's chest for what felt like an eternity, her finger resting on the trigger. The weight of 4 years of grief and rage, compressing into a single moment of choice. She could see herself pulling it, could feel the recoil, could imagine the catharsis of watching the man who'd stolen everything from her finally pay the price. But Raphael's face flashed in her mind, his small hand over his mouth during the silent game. The way he'd whispered, "Mama," like it was a secret prayer. The innocence she was fighting to preserve. She lowered the gun. No, she said quietly. Not like this. He goes to the authorities. He confesses everything, every child he stole, every family he destroyed, every lie he told. He burns, but he burns legally. Antonio had looked at her with something like wonder, then made the call. Within an hour, federal agents swarmed the estate. Ones Antonio trusted, ones he had leverage over. Vargo was arrested, screaming about immunity deals that would never materialize. The evidence was overwhelming. The scandal would consume him slowly, publicly, in a way that a bullet never could. Valentina had tried to run, made it as far as the Swiss border before Antonio's reach caught up with her. She was granted a choice: disappear forever with enough money to survive but never return, or face prosecution as Vargo's co-conspirator. She chose exile. The divorce papers were signed from an undisclosed location. That was 4 months ago. Now, morning sunlight streamed through windows that had once been covered with heavy drapes. The Bellomo estate had been transformed. The grey walls were painted warm yellows and soft blues. Photographs covered the surfaces. Raphael laughing, Raphael sleeping, Raphael covered in paint from an art project. The fortress had become a home. Katerina sat at the breakfast table in the informal dining room, coaxing Raphael through his meal. He was talking now. Actual words stringing together into sentences. The specialist said it was remarkable progress. Katerina knew it was just a child finally feeling safe enough to speak. More pancake, Mama. Raphael held up his plate, syrup smeared across his cheeks. Say please, Tesoro. Please, Mama. His grin was pure sunshine. She served him another pancake, her heart still catching every time he called her Mama, without hesitation, without confusion. The transition had been easier than anyone expected. Children understood love in ways adults had forgotten. Antonio entered through the terrace doors, his hair still damp from a morning swim. No guns, no bodyguards hovering. Just a man in casual clothes, looking more relaxed than Katerina had ever seen him. The shoulder wound had healed to a scar he wore without complaint. He'd changed too. Still powerful, still commanding, but the edges had softened. He smiled more, laughed at Raphael's jokes, played on the floor with toy cars. He'd discovered that being a father didn't require ruling through fear. Good morning. He kissed the top of Raphael's head, then hesitated, before pressing a gentle kiss to Katerina's temple. They'd been navigating this strange new relationship carefully. Not quite lovers, not quite co-parents, something undefined and fragile and growing. He sat at the head of the table, poured himself coffee, and watched them with an expression Katerina had learned to read. Contentment mixed with something deeper, more vulnerable. Raphael finished eating and ran off to play, leaving them in comfortable silence. I spoke with my lawyers yesterday, Antonio said finally. The adoption can be finalized. Legal? Legitimate, your name on every document. He's yours in every court in the world. Ours, Katerina corrected gently. He's ours. Antonio's hand moved across the table. He slid a small velvet box toward her, then immediately looked uncertain, an expression that seemed foreign on his face. I'm not asking because of him, Antonio said carefully. I'm not asking to make the lawyers happy or to legitimize anything. I'm asking because somewhere between you turning my son's nursery into a fortress and you choosing mercy when you had every right to choose vengeance, I fell in love with you. Katerina's breath caught. He needs his mother, Antonio continued, his voice rough with emotion, and I need his mother, not as an employee, not as a co-parent, as my wife, as my partner. As the woman who taught me that strength isn't just violence, and power isn't just fear. He opened the box. The ring inside was simple, elegant, a single diamond that caught the morning light. Marry me, Katerina. Make this family real. She looked at the ring, at this man who'd been raised to take what he wanted, but was asking instead. At the house filled with sunlight and laughter. At the life they'd built from the ashes of tragedy. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes. He slipped the ring on her finger, and when he kissed her, it tasted like coffee and promise and second chances neither of them deserved, but both had fought for. From the living room came Raphael's voice. Mama, Papa, come play! They went.